She thought love would save her, a fresh start, a chance at happiness far from the pain of her past. But when her picture arrived at the doorstep of a hopeful groom, the excitement turned into silence and then rejection, not because of her heart, her dreams, or her worth, but because of the color of her skin. Alone, humiliated, and ready to give up, she never expected that one powerful man would see in her what others refused to. But who was he, and why would his choice change everything? Amora had grown up believing that love could heal even the deepest wounds. Raised in a small village, she knew hardship, but she also knew resilience. When she became a mail-order bride, she carried with her not just the hope of a new beginning, but the weight of her family's dreams. Her letters were filled with kindness, her heart eager to belong, her spirit ready to embrace the unknown. The man who had written back seemed promising, educated, kind, ready to build a life together. For Amora, it felt like fate was finally opening its doors. Yet beneath her excitement lingered an unspoken fear. Would her skin color close those doors before she could even step through? The first letter Amora received from her future husband filled her with light. He spoke of open fields, golden harvests, and a quiet life where two people could grow old together. With every word, she began to imagine herself in a place where opportunity stretched as far as the horizon. She saved every coin, packed only what she could carry, and boarded a ship that promised new beginnings. But when she arrived, the welcome she dreamed of never came. The man who had written such tender words glanced at her once, then turned cold. His eyes lingered not on her face or her smile, but on the shade of her skin. Within moments, his excitement turned to disdain. He muttered excuses, stumbling over words he couldn't quite say aloud, yet the message was clear. He hadn't expected a bride who looked like her. Rejection hit her like a storm. In a foreign land, with no family to run to and no home to enter, Amora stood in silence, clutching the letters that had once promised her safety. Strangers passed by, their whispers sharp, their stays heavy. The very street she hoped would be her path to freedom became corridors of shame. Days blurred into weeks. Each attempt to find honest work was met with closed doors. Her accent, her skin, her presence, they were enough to invite suspicion before she could even prove herself. She slept where she could, often under the roof of barns or on church steps, praying for a miracle that never came. And yet, it wasn't just the hunger or the loneliness that cut deepest. It was a quiet cruelty of being unseen, as if her very existence was a mistake, an inconvenience, a problem no one wished to solve. At her lowest, she began to believe that perhaps they were right, that maybe she had no place here at all. But life is a way of shifting when hope feels most impossible. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, a carriage stopped near the road where she rested. The man who stepped out was no ordinary traveler. His presence commanded respect. His clothes mocked him as someone of wealth. Yet what struck Amora most wasn't his status. It was the way his eyes met hers. Not with pity, not with scorn, but with recognition, as though he saw something in her no one else had cared to notice. What he would do next would challenge everything, the community's prejudice, his own reputation, and the very rules that had tried to keep them apart. The whispers began almost immediately. When the wealthy farmer, Elias, invited Amora into his home, the townsfolk watched with eyes full of judgment. To them, she was an outsider, a stain against their order, someone who dared to exist where she wasn't meant to. Rumors spread like wildfire, that she was unworthy, that Elias had gone mad, that a woman like her could only bring shame. At first, Elias ignored it. He gave her food, shelter, and dignity. For the first time since she had arrived in this land, Amora felt seen, not as a burden, but as a woman of worth. But acceptance in his home did not mean safety beyond its walls. In the market, women turned their backs when she approached. Shopkeepers served her last, or not at all. Children pointed, repeating the cool words they had overheard at their dinner tables. Every outing became a gauntlet of humiliation. Yet the cruelest blow came when Elias's peers, wealthy farmers and men of influence, confronted him directly. They told him he was ruining his standing, that no man of his position should ever lower himself to such disgrace. Their voices carried the weight of tradition and power, sharpened by bigotry. It wasn't just about Amora. It was about control, about reminding everyone where the lines were drawn. Elias could have walked away then. He could have turned from her, preserved his reputation, and silenced the gossip. Many expected he would. Even Amora, heart-heavy, prepared herself for the possibility of losing the only kindness she had known. But that day, in front of those who questioned his choices, Elias refused to bend. His voice, calm yet unshakable, cut through their accusations. He spoke of her resilience, her courage, her quiet dignity in the face of cruelty. He told them that he saw in her a partner, not a scandal. And in that moment, it became clear this wasn't just his defiance. It was a declaration that he would stand against a world determined to deny her humanity. The crowd silence that followed was not acceptance. It was fury restrained, a storm waiting to break. And as Amora stood behind him, her hands trembling, she realized the danger was far from over. Because in towns like this, defiance carried a price. In the weeks that followed, Elias and Amora lived under constant watch. Some neighbors refused to speak to them. Others tried to shame them into silence. But in the face of cruelty, something remarkable happened. Their bond grew stronger. Amora, once left in the shadows of rejection, now stood with her head high. Elias, once defined by wealth alone, became known for his courage to love openly in defiance of hate. They didn't erase the prejudice around them. No two people could. But by refusing to bow to it, they carved out a life on their own terms. Their fields thrived, their home became a place of quiet strength, and slowly a few began to see them not as scandal, but as proof that dignity and humanity cannot be denied by color. And yet, the scars remained. Every whisper, every closed door, every hateful stare was a reminder that racism does not simply vanish. It adapts, it lingers, it waits for silence to protect it. Amora's story is not an isolated one. It is a story of countless women and men who faced rejection not for who they were, but for what they looked like. So the question is not just about Amora or Elias. It's about us. How many dreams must be crushed before we admit that love and what should never be measured by skin? How many more lives will be judged, diminished, or erased before we finally choose to see people as they are, not as prejudice defines them? Because in the end, their fight was not just for survival. It was for the truth that should belong to us all, that every human being deserves to be seen, respected, and loved,